Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Chapter 5, Lesson 5, where we are working on comparing decimals and fractions and then comparing and ordering rational numbers. So go ahead and get your book open to page 388. So turn to page 388. Looks just like this. Compare decimals and fractions. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started right away. So taking a look right here, this is what we're working on. This is our objective. It says positive and negative rational numbers can be represented on a number line. You can use a number line to help you compare and order rational numbers. So let's take a look at number 1. It says, fill in each circle with less than, greater than, or equal to make the statement true. So we are comparing negative 1 and 2/10 to 0 and 8/10. So notice that I have a negative and then I have a positive. So if you can look here on our number line right here, you can see that there is negative 1.2 and there is positive 1.8. So knowing what we know about number lines, we know that the greater numbers are always to the right. So the greater numbers are to the right. Make sure you are writing this down. The greater numbers are to the right. So when I look at this, my bigger number is 0.8, which means that my alligator mouth, which we've talked about before, my alligator mouth is going to eat the bigger number. Okay, you can add some little teeth on there so it shows like an alligator mouth eating it. So negative 1 and 2/10 is less than 0 and 8/10. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Now, take a look at this number line. This number line does not go horizontal, which means it does not go this way, although I meant to actually go like this. Okay, it does not go horizontal, rather it goes vertical, meaning it goes up and down. And take a look, we have negative 1 and 20 hundredths, negative 1 and 30 hundredths, negative 1 and 40 hundredths. We're noticing that we're missing some numbers in the middle. Well, directly in the middle of that is negative 1 and 25 hundredths. And then here is negative 1 and 35 hundredths. Now, you don't necessarily need to put those in there, but they're showing us that we're taking this number line and going by fives, which is perfect. We can do that. So we need to compare negative 1 and 40 hundredths to negative 1 and 25 hundredths. Now, we said up above here, right up here, that the greater numbers are to the right. Well, when we are talking about vertical, up and down, our greater numbers are at the top. Greater numbers at the top. Okay, make sure you write that down. So they're graphing negative 1 and 25 hundredths, and they're plotting negative 1 and 40 hundredths. So if I know that the greater number is up at top, then I know that the alligator is going to eat the bigger number, meaning that this right here, negative 1 and 40 hundredths, is less than negative 1 and 25 hundredths. Okay. All right, the next thing that we might look at when we're comparing is we can see that here we are looking at two negative numbers, okay, and we're looking at fractions. So now I have negative 3/8, what is it, greater than, less than, or equal to negative 5/16. The first thing that we have to do when we are comparing fractions is we have to have a common denominator. You cannot compare these fractions unless you have a common denominator. So I'm going to look at my denominators, which are 8 and 16, and I'm going to come up with my least common denominator, otherwise known as my least common multiple. And so when I were to list out the multiples of this, 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16. We'll take a look here. 16 times 1 is 16. 16 times 2 is 32, but I don't need to go any farther. My common denominator is 16. So now I need to rename my negative 3/8 so that I have a denominator with 16. So how do I get from here to here? I multiply by 2. How do I get from here to here? I multiply by 2. So 3 times 2, or whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do the top. So 3 times 2 is 6. And now I am going to be comparing negative 6/16 to negative 5/16. And since I'm looking at my number line right here, okay, I know just by looking at the top, my denominators are the same, so now I'm looking at just the top. I have negative 6 and negative 5. I know that negative 6 is less than negative 5, okay, even on just a regular number line. So therefore, negative 3/8 is less than negative 5/16. Okay, we're going to take a look at some of these problems down here, so go ahead and move on. Let's take a look at A. Well, A is going to be pretty easy because one is positive and one is negative. Okay, so I have 3 1/10 greater than, less than, or equal to negative 3 7/10. So I know that my positive number is going to be bigger. Okay, we're going to jump down here to C and take a look. Our denominators are the same, so that means we just have to compare the numerators. There's not a negative, so therefore I know that 9/16 is less than 12/16. All right, let's take a look at B. Negative 4 5/10 greater than, less than, or equal to negative 4 49/100. Okay, so if you're thinking of a number line, okay, like this, and I have, let's see, we can start with negative 4.4, okay, and then let's say over here we get to negative 4.5, okay, we're going to see that once we get, there's negative 4.5, and we know that this would be like negative 4.41, okay, and we know that right about here is going to be negative 4.49, because really this is the exact same as that by adding a 0. So there's this, and we know that the number that is to the right is going to be the greater number, so it's going to look like that. Okay, the next one that we're going to take a look at is negative 7/10 greater than, less than, or equal to negative 4/5. Well, we know that our common denominator is going to be 10. So I'm going to multiply 5 times 2 gives me 10. So whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. I'm going to make that be 4 times 2, which is 8. Now I have to remember that these are negative numbers, right? They're negative numbers. So really I have negative 7/10, and I'm comparing it with negative 8/10. Okay? And if we think about that as just like we were to write it as a decimal, I would have negative 0 7/10, and I'm comparing it with negative 8/10. Okay, since we're talking negative, my 7/10 is greater than my negative 8/10. Okay, so that is writing down greater than or less than. Creating a number line is something you might want to do just to be on the safe side, to make sure you know what you're doing. Okay, we're going to skip this page right now, and I want you to jump over to these examples because we're going to do a couple of these examples, and then the next part of the video we'll talk about the ordering part, but we're going to go ahead and do some more examples together. So, jumping to the guided practice on page 390, take a look. I have 9 7/10, and I'm comparing it with negative 10 3/10. Okay, when I look at this, I know, bless me, I know that I have a positive and a negative, and I know a positive is always greater than a negative. So I don't even really need to think any more about that. I just know that on a number line, my negative 10 3/10 is going to be all the way down here, and my positive 9 7/10 is going to be on the opposite side. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Oh my goodness, same thing. This one's a positive, this one is a negative. While they have the same denominator, we don't even need to do any math because we know that this positive is going to be bigger. All right, let's take a look at this one. Oh, I love this one. We're going to turn this into a decimal. Do you see why we did that before? -6 and 7/10. Okay, and I want to know if it's greater than or equal to -6 and 7/10. That is equal to. So all I did was turn this into a decimal. If it wasn't so easy, I would take my numerator, remember, and divide it by my denominator, and you would see that I would get negative, I'd get my 0.7, okay? So which is exactly what we got right here with my 6. All right, the next one. So here we have this decimal, and we're going to actually turn this one into a decimal. So we're going to take that 5/6, that -5/6, and we're going to drop it down, and we're going to divide this problem out. And when I divide it out, I know that goes in 0. I know that this goes in 8 times, which is 48, and I'm left with a 2. And I drop that down, and I know that that goes in 3 times, which is 18, a 2, oh, and then I notice that I get 20 again, so I know that this is going to keep repeating. So this one as a decimal looks like this. So now, knowing that my negative, if I'm thinking of a number line, which one is going to come first on the negative side? This one will be. So -5/6 is greater than 0 or -0 and 94/100. Okay. Let's take a look. Go to the next page. Let's take a look at these problems right here. So the next one is 5/4 and -1/4. Not even having to do any math on that one because we know that my positive, that is not very good, knowing that my positive number is always going to be greater than. Okay, we learned about 1/3. We talked about it, which means it is really this, and that repeats itself. And I'm comparing it with a terminating decimal. And remember, this would be 6.3333, and it's going to keep going. Oh my goodness, it's going to keep going on and on forever, right? So when I'm comparing these two negatives, remember, I've got to think about which one's going to come first on the number line and in the opposite direction. So we know that 6 and 1/3 and 6.1 or 6.33333 is going to come before this -6.375 because they're negatives, and we know that that is going to be greater than. Okay, so now I'm going to take this 3/5, -3/5, and I'm comparing it with -6/10. I'm going to take that 3/5 and I'm going to go ahead and divide that. So turn this into a decimal, and I know that's 0, and I know that it is 6, 30, 0, oh, and then that's going to be 0. So guess what? This is -0.6, and those are equal. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop here for video 1. And we're going to take a look at video 2, which is going to be comparing and ordering rational numbers. So go ahead and stop here, and then make sure you watch the next part of the video, and or you can get started on the homework part and just start comparing the numbers rather than ordering the numbers, because that's going to be the next thing we're going to do in the next video. Okay, so go ahead and stop here, and then make sure your book is open to page 389.